you're back on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. And 87 years ago, a blessed event happened in the United States of America. The birthday was August 14th, the birthday being not that of a person, but of Social Security, a program that is wildly popular in the United States across all regions and across all political affiliations. And here to talk to us about Social Security, I don't know anybody more qualified than my next guest and my good friend who knows more about the history of Social Security than anybody I know. Nancy Altman is the president of Social Security Works and the author of a number, or co-author of a number of books about the program, including Social Security Works for Everyone, which she co-authored with Eric Kingson, and The Truth About Social Security, which has a long subtitle I don't remember, which you really have to read because there have been so many zombie lives. I know the word zombie lives is in the subtitle about this extremely successful program. So without any further introduction, Nancy Altman, welcome back to the Zero Hour.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, we celebrate so many ludicrous birthdays in this country of silly things. I'm surprised we don't make a bigger deal out of Social Security's birthday, but there was a celebration here in Washington, D.C., wasn't there?
There was. The Democrats are fully on board for expanding Social Security, not cutting it, and requiring the wealthy to pay their fair share. And so they had a national day of action, not on Sunday, which was the birthday, but the following day on Monday. There was a national town hall meeting. There were lots of tweets all through. And my attitude is birthdays, can be birth weeks, birth months, birth years. So I think this was a several day celebration, which I think is appropriate, as you say, for a program that is so important.
And it's hard, I think, nowadays for people to picture what life was like before there was Social Security. I think we take it for granted. I guess the enabling legislation, refresh my memory, was passed in 1935, and the program was initiated, I think it was fully in place by 1938. Is that right?
No, it wasn't that quick. Because it was insurance, there needed time for it to be phased in, because people had to pay their premiums. They're called insurance contributions, but they had to pay them. So the first monthly benefit was paid to a woman, Ida Mae Fuller, in 1940, January of 1940. And she actually lived for a very long time. So she continued to get a monthly check for a very long time, because one of the important elements of Social Security is you can outlive your savings, but you cannot outlive Social Security. So it was passed in the midst of the Depression, but it was not really passed for the Depression. It was passed so that Franklin Roosevelt's genius was to understand that in good times and in bad, as long as people are dependent on wages, and we remain dependent on wages, almost everyone, we need insurance against the loss of those wages. You can lose wages because you grow old, and that was what was enacted in 1935. It was expanded just 4 years later in 1939, when family benefits were added, survivor benefits were added, basically life insurance, because anyone can die leaving children premature, dying, leaving children. And disability insurance was added in 1956. But nothing has been added. The program has not been expanded. Congress has not acted to expand it for half a century. They used to have legislation every few years, but 1972 was the last year there was expansion, 50 years ago.
And, you know, Ida Mae Fuller, it's a great name somehow for first recipient, yes. But she, she illustrates for me an important point about social insurance, which Social Security is, as opposed to a retirement plan. You know, I mean, there are those who would say, well, particularly, Republicans and other lifelong opponents of programs like Social Security might say, well, why should she, and she had the audacity to live a long time. If she paid in for 5 years, and then or so, and that she got to collect for however many years. That doesn't seem fair, they'll say, or whatever. And I think it's important for people to understand the concept of insurance versus retirement plan, right? Because I can buy car insurance on Monday and have a car accident on Wednesday,
Exactly.
or I can pay car insurance for 40 years and never have an accident. The point of insurance is different, isn't it?
Exactly. It's a pooling of risk. And that's what, we can all save on our own. We don't need incentives to save, or incentives are fine, but people can save on their own, but you can't self-insure unless you're extremely wealthy. We need to have pool our risks and our responsibilities. And to me, that's what part of being part of a nation is, that it's the idea of Social Security is the idea that we're all in it together. And I think that in this time of polarization, it's really valuable to have, there have been attacks on all kinds of institutions, and the Republicans are certainly trying to attack our Social Security system. But that's one that everyone understands. That you see the deduction from your paycheck. People who've retired or become disabled who are receiving benefits, children who've received survivor benefits, and so forth. So, and everyone understands the value, and that we're all in it together. And I think it's part of the genius of Franklin Roosevelt was to craft a program that really embodied basic American values that both conservatives and liberals, MAGA, people who are MAGA folks and people who are union members can all ascribe to, and all overwhelmingly polling shows support Social Security.
And Nancy Altman, you said something really important a few minutes ago, which is you said, it was passed during the Depression, but it's not really a creation or response. I forget your exact words, but didn't really come out of the Depression. And I think that's important for people to understand the history of the idea that became Social Security and the place that it had in American history, predating not only 1932 and not only the election of Roosevelt or 1929 and the stock market crash that led to the Great Depression, but going way, way back, right?
Yeah, let me elaborate a bit. And that is that Franklin Roosevelt understood, and the people around him understood, that to get immediate relief for those to fight the Depression, what we needed was welfare. And there were a number of titles within the Social Security Act, which were welfare provisions. And those began right away: aid to dependent children, grants for the elderly, and so forth. The mainly state-run programs, which were a problem in many ways, but they were something that could be done. But what President Roosevelt, Francis Perkins, and the others who created Social Security realized was, once the Depression was gone, we still needed basic economic security. There was, as you said, when Social Security was enacted, most people worked as long as they could, but not everybody. There was a point where most people had to stop working, or somebody might have a disabling accident and couldn't work. If you couldn't work, you wound up moving in with your adult children. If you did not have adult children, you literally went to the poorhouse. That now sounds like an old, Charles Dickens expression, but every state but New Mexico had poorhouses or poor farms at the time, in 1935, at the time Social Security was enacted. And the people in the poorhouses were overwhelmingly, like 95%, were people over the age of 60. They were people who'd worked their whole lives, but could no longer work and did not have other family members who could or would take them in, and literally went to the poorhouse. And you can read about the conditions of the poorhouse. You would not wish that on your worst enemy. They were horrible conditions, but people had no choice.
And this was even in good, quote unquote, good economic times.
Absolutely. That was the way it was. And in fact, hidden in the one big difference between the Depression and the 2008 Great Recession that people talk about is that hidden in the statistics, 1/3 out of work of the Depression, that really embodied three generations. It was the workers but it was also their children, but it was also their parents, because parents generally live with their adult children. The recession, quite to the contrary, although 401ks, they were lost enormous amount of value. People, again, the stock market, people lost enormous amount of wealth, but Social Security was there continuing to pay, which meant that not only were seniors able to weather that storm, but they could help their younger family members because they had that steady source of income when younger people often didn't and lost their jobs.
Yeah, and the transformation that represents is huge, right? I mean, this is first the not only that they can help younger generations, let's say young adult parents or whomever, or young adults living on their own for the first time, or middle-aged adults, but the removal of that enormous burden from
absolutely
people, financial burden from when parents get infirm, older, that type of thing. So, as I recall, now I don't recall my exact chronology here, Nancy Altman, but I know that even before FDR was elected in 1932, there was a major movement of what they call Townsend clubs, right?
Yes.
And Dr. Townsend, I can't remember if it was Francis Townsend, I can't remember his first name.
That was right.
It was Francis, yeah, okay. He had this idea for something that in many ways resembled Social Security, I think, right? And
it was a bit of it was enormously popular. What happened was as the story goes, Dr. Townsend was living, I think, in San Diego. He'd been a doctor, but he was out of work. He was looking out of his window and he saw some people scrounging through the trash who were hungry. And he was so outraged. He came up with an idea that the government should pay everyone what was at that time quite a princely sum, everyone over, I think, was age 60. And the only requirement was that you spend it all in the month, that you couldn't get any more until you spend it all. And the idea was this would create jobs and this would, but it was, it was not funded and so forth. And all he did was write a letter to his local paper and it took off. There were Townsend clubs all over the country. There were elections that were won and lost. And people were always asked what their position was on Townsend. And if you weren't strongly enough, they would actually chase you down the street to get an answer and so forth. And so when Social Security was proposed and when it was being debated in Congress, there were some who were advocating the Townsend plan. And the votes they used an odd procedure. That was not a voice vote and it was not a recorded vote. They stood up because they didn't want anyone to know how they were voting because it was the Townsend plan got voted down and Social Security was the more moderate and really, I think, more responsible and had more staying power. But that was a time in the Depression when our system of capitalism was really under quite a bit of challenge. And there were, of course, we do know what happened in Nazi Germany. There were all over the world, there were extreme movements and there were extremes on the left and the right. But again, I think Franklin Roosevelt had the genius to know that we had to have basic economic security. We had to have guardrails around our system. And what was better than insurance that we all contributed to and we all benefited from?
And I guess what I'm driving at, Nancy, among other things, is, yes, I acknowledge Roosevelt's political genius. I mean, I'm not at all disputing that, but that it did. I guess what my hypothesis I'm putting, before you, and you can tell me what you think, is that didn't take place in a vacuum. That Roosevelt drew on a number of forces and precedents, and one of them was I think one history I read said that there were 1 to 2 million members estimated of the Townsend clubs, and the total population of the country was so much less than that, it must be the equivalent of, who knows, 8-10 million today. This is an enormously popular idea.
And this was before internet and all of that. So it was all, not even, yes.
right. So it went viral before,
Yeah, before this,
yeah,
before
before,
they all, maybe before they understood what viruses were, it was going
right.
viral.
Exactly. Well, I think they do. But the, so they, uh, so he had that, right? He had, the sense that there was a popular upsurge for this. He had the example of, whether it was Bismarck or others who were working on healthcare systems because healthcare was on his radar somewhere. And as you've talked about a lot, Social Security was a broad framework. And, you edited an edition of Agrarian Justice by Tom Paine. So
Goes way
going back
back.
to, right, going back to the
Yeah.
founding of the Republic, people think, well, America was founded on these ideas of rugged individualism, and you go out in the wilderness and leaving aside our exploitation of the wilderness and the people there, but you go outside in the wilderness, you either make it on your own or you starve. That on the contrary, Roosevelt was, I would argue, was drawing on a deeply American strain of mutual aid rather than individual dog eat dog, red and tooth and claw.
I,
Don't
I,
you think?
I think that's exactly right. And there's always been that strain. I mean, the Tom Paine was not only ahead of his time, he's actually was ahead of our time because he really had the view not only should there be support when you became old, but when you were just first becoming mature and going off on your own, you should have you should have some money to get started. So because he understood that you were starting a family, you might need to have property, you might. So he would have been horrified at the idea of people coming out of college with all of this debt. But I think the point you make is really an excellent one, that we've always had this kind of communitarian, there were barn raisings and so forth. If there were a fire, everybody would go out, or if there was a harvest, everyone would pitch in and help and so forth. But as we became industrialized and people moved to the cities and they stopped having that kind of extended support, people recognized there were all kinds of advocates that pushed for minimum wage and national health insurance and workers' compensation and a whole range of movements, including old age pensions. What happened was two things. One is it had to be done at the state level because there was concern about the Supreme Court. And they made quite a bit of stride, but the Depression came, and unlike the federal government, which can control its money and can deficit spend, the states were wiped out. So they could no longer afford those programs, and you had to focus on the federal government. And Franklin Roosevelt had been progressive in New York State, and he and Francis Perkins had worked with him there, and they brought their ideas to the federal government. So there is a very long range, as you say, starting with the founding and Tom Paine, that there's sort of this idea of rugged individualism, but it's, they don't like to acknowledge that, well, somebody's building the roads and somebody is ensuring that there's a police force and a fire force and so forth, that there's always been, it's never been truly, it's a mix. And that's what's the wonder of Social Security. Dwight Eisenhower, when he got elected, no one was quite sure where he would stand on it, but he gave a great speech saying that that Social Security represented sturdy self-reliance. It was the very kind of individualism, because we all contribute, even minimum wage workers, everyone contributes on their first dollar of earnings. You get a job at age 16, you're contributing. So everybody contributes. And when an insured event happens, you draw out. So you can think of it as both individualism, and because we each are responsible for contributing, but we also are sharing our risks. And
and here's a little bit, since we're talking about FDR, Harvey J.K., who's the historian, who's a friend of mine, friend of the program, he, I guess a couple of years ago, edited a pretty, not a complete, but a pretty thorough volume of FDR's speeches going way back in his career. And I found in one of his earliest speeches from 1910, when he was running for the state senate in New York, a kind of arresting phrase where he said, we talk a lot in this country about individuals and their liberties and their rights, and and they have rights and they have liberties, but communities have rights too, and communities have liberties too. And he doesn't really expound on it, but I found it intriguing. And I asked Harvey what he thought, and Harvey, being a good lefty, said, "Well, I think he was trying to get around using words like socialism, but talking, probably makes sense." But to me, what that says is that the anti-social security extremism that we've heard, that you've documented since the founding of Social Security, the people just frothing at the mouth, going over the top, attacking it, is really an attack on our group liberties. It's not just an attack on the welfare of people, a brutal and inhumane thing they're trying to do to people, and the consequences. It's that too, but it's like, we have the right, collectively, we have the right to decide we're going to intermingle our destinies in this way and collectively help each other and help ourselves. And anyway, I'll stop.
No, but I think that's a really important point. Just as an aside, I love reading Franklin Roosevelt's speeches. I kind of wish some of them you could just take out and hand to Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden or any politician. Just say, read this, because they really are quite modern. But we've always had a sense, and I think this is what Franklin Roosevelt was getting at, a sense of the commons. We have in New England, they're called commons, but the idea of public spaces, public parks. Theodore Roosevelt, a Republican, was the one who wanted to set aside our national, have national parks and so forth. And so I think the frothing at the mouth comes from two things. One is very wealthy people. It's sort of, they must be unbelievably insecure because they don't want to contribute. They don't want to, you could have billions, more than you could spend in your lifetime, but somehow, whether it's keeping score or something else, they don't seem to want to spend a penny on the common good. So some of it is they can self-insure. So let everybody else on their own. But I think the other part is that it really puts the lie to the idea that, the private sector is always better and everything, we should have private prisons and private this and private that, private armies. There are some things that government does better than the private sector. And a program like Social Security is one of them. It's much more efficient. It's portable. It's much more popular. It's fair in its distribution. It is head and shoulders over any other kind of private sector retirement income program, life insurance, disability insurance that you can find.
So in a sense, it's a sort of living rebuke to everything they believe in, really.
Exactly. Which is why they want to destroy it, because they want it to stop being a living rebuke. They want it buried. And it's why they're trying to privatize Medicare, and pretty unfortunately succeeding.
Well, yeah, and I was just going to pivot to Medicare in a second, because first of all, Medicare, we've talked about this before, but the very phrase Social Security, if you stop and think about it, we've learned that it means checks that go out to certain people. But if you think about the phrase as it was originally crafted, clearly it means a much broader vision, right?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of writing. And you mentioned the truth about Social Security. I went back and did a lot of writing and looking at the founders' words and used them. And the first commissioner was a man named Arthur Altman, who was Assistant Secretary of Labor, worked with Perkins, was originally from Wisconsin. And he talked about that actually President Roosevelt called it economic security. It was the Economic Security Act when it was introduced. It got changed in the Ways and Means Committee to Social Security. No one, it's now lost to history which member proposed that. But as soon as someone suggested it, everybody started calling it Social Security. And it's taken off. It's the name that's used around the world. But what Arthur Altmaier pointed out was that in other countries, it's a synonym for the good life. It meant you had to have economic security. You have to be healthy. You have to have a good education. You have to have a guaranteed job. You have to have a living wage, and so forth. And included in that is what our Social Security provides: wage insurance in the event of disability. Unemployment is not. We don't think of that as Social Security, but it was in the Social Security Act and so forth. But in the United States, around the world, it has that much more. Children's allowances, much more a broader meaning. In this country, the name has really latched onto the Old Age Survivors Disability Insurance Program run by the Social Security Administration. However, I should point out that as president of Social Security Works, we think of Social Security the way the founders did. So that's why we're for canceling student debt. We are for expanding Medicare for all. We are for expanding Social Security. We are for, I don't even think fight for 15 now. I think it should be higher than $15, but why we need to increase the minimum wage and so forth.
Yeah, I think that vision of a society built on security for all and mutually guaranteed security is the vision really we're looking for. And the fact is that's hence the tie into Medicare. And, you know, we've for the first time got some first steps toward restraining drug prices. You know, I would like to see a lot more. I'm sure you would too. But for the first time, you know, that mechanism is underway. So that's Medicare for seniors. I would have loved to see it cover dental and vision too, so that people on Medicare don't face, you know, financial threats, a loss of security there. But, you know, hopefully that's coming. Medicare for all, so that nobody has to worry about choosing between health and financial security. But where do you see this fight going, I guess?
Well, it's interesting. And let me just comment on what you just said and then where the fight is going. And that is that President Roosevelt, he had a committee, economic security, that he set up to come up with the legislation. And it was not, his vision was much broader. He thought there should be guaranteed universal health insurance and maternal benefits and all sorts of in fact, people sometimes write, Franklin Roosevelt wouldn't recognize Social Security today. And what I always say is he'd recognize it. He'd just be shocked we aren't further along. When he signed it into law that 87 years ago, August 14th, 1935, he called it a structure that is being built, but is by no means complete. He talked about it as too precious to start too extravagantly. You had to start small and build incrementally on it. So absolutely, he had that large vision. And when Medicare finally, you know, President Truman tried very hard to get guaranteed health insurance, was unsuccessful. The activists decided, well, let's try something new. Let's go for different groups at a time. And covering Medicare for seniors was intended as a first step. In fact, they debated whether they should start with children or start with seniors, because children, if you give them health care, they have a lifetime of health. On the other hand, seniors have the most acute need. So they decided to go with seniors, and they expanded it in 1972 to people with disabilities. And most people thought, okay, we're going to add children and then we'll just keep expanding it. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. One point about the drugs, it was a huge victory. The Inflation Reduction Act, which has just been signed into law. There'll be a celebration, I think, of it in September. It had a lot of excellent provisions. It was finally restraining pharma. But I must point out that if the Democrats had been in charge, I would hope, at least if Franklin Roosevelt had been in charge, he would have made a drug simply another benefit to traditional Medicare and provided it directly. I mean, this idea that you have to shop for private insurance and so forth, it's really, there should be public manufacture of drugs, and maybe we'll get there someday, but at least there's this restraint. So I don't know if I'm happy to keep going and talk about where we're next, but I don't.
No, I mean, I think I would love to see a system where Medicare itself covered
prescription
pharmaceuticals
drugs,
as well as everything else. I mean, it's a terrible system, and it places a lot of unpredictability on people, a lot of randomness in the choices they make. It's just awful. So that would be great. And meanwhile, there's this, you alluded to it in the beginning, maybe before we end, we can at least talk about it for a second. There's this sort of almost subversive attempt to eat away at Medicare, traditional Medicare itself, privatizing it very successfully, unfortunately, in a way that seems attractive to people until they get sick, right?
That's right. And it's a very hard one because the Republicans have put a thumb on the scale and the Democrats haven't been able to take the thumb off. And that is that Medicare Advantage costs more than traditional Medicare. It's much less efficient, and it's much less predictable. You have much less choice of physicians and so forth, but it has these add-ons. And if you're healthy, it skims off the healthy people. Excuse me. So it's really an effort to dismantle Medicare through privatization. Now, George Bush and the Republicans have tried that with Social Security, but Social Security is too well understood that when George Bush proposed privatizing Social Security, even though he had a Republican House and Senate, he couldn't even get them to take it up for a vote because it was so unpopular. But that is exactly what they want to do. And there is a real fight going on right now. The Democrats are in favor of expanding Social Security with no cuts. Excuse me, my voice.
Take your time.
Take a quick sip. But so the Democrats know what they want, but the Republicans want to go behind closed doors and dismantle Social Security. And if this election goes the wrong way, we could snap back in a nanosecond where the Democrats agree to go behind closed doors with Social Security. And what comes out will be a destruction of the program. There's thoughts about, let's help the low income. But what that means is wiping out the benefits of the middle class, which is part of what makes Social Security so valuable and so popular. So as long as Social Security has been around, the whole 87 years, there have always been those first who opposed it and then wanted to get rid of it. And so far, the American people have always been involved in the fight, and they love Social Security, and they've always supported it. But the problem is that the Republicans and Democrats today often go through the regular order, and it could happen without people knowing what was going on, nor who to blame, because they're trying to avoid political accountability. So it's really important this election coming up that people who care about Social Security ask those who are running, do you support expanding Social Security with no cuts, or would you vote for cuts to Social Security? And if they won't answer you, that's your answer. You should only vote for someone who says, I'm for expanding Social Security with no cuts.
Boy, and if I were a House Democrat and I supported expanding Social Security, I'd sure make a big point of telling everybody that. And I'd also say, I want to vote on this between now and November, even if it's just a statement of principle,
Absolutely.
so that I can tell the voters this before election day.
You know, it's very interesting. There was I was working with the California Alliance for Retired Americans on a resolution aimed at the California delegation, including, of course, Speaker Pelosi, praising the 2100 Act and pushing for a vote. It passed the Senate a few weeks ago, and it just passed the Assembly today. The interesting thing is that even Republicans, all the Democrats voted for it. It passed with I think there were 2 that were absent, but everyone who was there, all Democrats voted for it. Every Republican, except one, every Republican, even those who spoke against it, did not vote against it. They abstained. They wouldn't vote for it, but they abstained. The only Republican who did vote on the record was someone who was retiring, and he voted for it. That's how powerful Social Security is as an issue. And that's why we need a vote before November, because the platitudes, you know, every candidate says, I love Social Security. But the real question is, you know, this is the old Vietnam. Are you going to destroy a village to save it? The only way to really, even then, it's, you don't hold them completely to the fire, but at least force them to vote one way or the other, whether they will expand Social Security with no cuts and require the wealthy to pay more or not.
And in the meantime, Social Security has survived for 87 years, despite all those people out to get it. So Nancy Altman, president of Social Security Works, thanks for coming and joining us to celebrate the history and birthday of Social Security.
And thank you so much again. I so appreciate you taking this topic up. It's so important to everyone.
And to us. So again, thank you. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.